Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webcast, sponsored by the Green Center at the University of Rochester and also Intern Bridge. This presentation, getting the most out of your virtual internship experience. My name is Dr. Robert Shindell. I am the president and CEO of Intern Bridge. I spent the majority of my career in and on higher education and working with students, working with employers, working with career center professionals in the area of internships and experiential learning to really focus on the experience that you as a student have when you are doing your internship, because there's things that the employer can do to make sure that your experience is really one that is powerful and positive and engaging for you. I'm a member of the Distinguished Scientist Advisory Board for the Oak Ridge Institute of Science and Education, where we oversee the internship experiences for more than 10,000 students throughout the U.S. Department of Energy. I've consulted with more than 500 universities in the United States and Canada and the UK. We've worked with thousands upon thousands of employers to help them develop their internship initiatives. And finally, I'm also the principal investigator for the National Internship and Co-op Study. Now, I tell you this not to impress you, but to impress upon you that what we're going to be talking about today is not my opinion. It's not something that, I woke up one day and said, gosh, I really think that this is a great idea that students should do during their internships. It is rooted in the data that we've been able to collect from students, very much like you who have done internship programs in the past. So with that, I wanted to start off and just say congratulations. If you have secured an internship, a virtual internship, even a hybrid or whatever you're going to be doing this summer, congratulations. This is an amazing first step in your career journey. Myself, I started my professional career with an internship, and I look back at that time, and granted it's been, well, it doesn't matter how long it's been, but I look back at that time and still remember so many things that I learned during that experience that I'm still pulling forward today in my professional career. So congratulations. And one of the things that I think that many students that I've talked with and worked with as a professor, as a career center professional over the years, is the one question that I have gotten from students for 2 decades is, how do I make my internship count? How do I make it really, really meaningful? I don't want just a summer job. I want to make sure that this is a really, really valuable experience. And there's some things that I think we can do, you can do, but also that your employer needs to do to make sure that it's such a valuable experience. And those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, because this really is that first step in your transition to the next chapter of your life. I mean, yes, wouldn't it be great if we could stay in school forever? Because, gosh, we love this environment. It's awesome. We go to class, we have our friends, we have maybe a job on the side, but making this transition to the next chapter of your life, it's game time. It's time to go out and really be able to showcase what we've learned and who we are as young professionals in this transition. So this presentation about how we can get the very most out of our internship experience, as I mentioned earlier, it's not my opinion, it's not what I think. It actually comes from more than 300,000 students just like you from all over the country over the last 12 years. Through our National Internship and Co-op Study, one of the questions that we ask is, and I'll try to repeat it verbatim, just so you kind of get a feel of what the question would be. The question is, if you could go back, so pretend that you're like taking this as a survey. If you could go back to your pre-internship self, what advice would you give that person? Think about that. These are students, over 300,000, that have gone through an internship that we're asking at the end of their experience, saying, hey, if you could go back to that person you were before you started the internship, now that you have completed it, what advice would you give that person? And we just got some amazing responses. And from those responses, we created some focus groups and really got into some great discussion with students all over the country. The good news is that much of the information has not changed in more than a decade. which should tell you something about how important the things are that we're going to be talking about today. So we've got a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we get into our panel discussion with your classmates and your peers, because my hope is that you've got a lot of questions for them. All right, so let's get started. Again, for many of you, this is the kind of the first stop in your professional career. And let's face it, that first step is the most important. How do we make that meaningful? How do we make sure that we get launched in the right direction? And really, it starts with one key point, and that is hope is not a strategy. If you hope your internship is going to be good, if you hope you're going to have a great relationship with your supervisor, if you hope you're going to be able to work on amazing projects, that's not a great strategy. Not a great strategy. So what does that mean? It means that we have to go into this thing that we're calling an internship or a co-op or student teaching or whatever it is you want to call it, into this new experience. We've got to have a plan. And that word plan that we're going to use today is an acronym, and each of those letters stand for something that we can focus on. And I hope that this helps it to be memorable for you. So let's go through it. First, we got to prepare for the journey. You have already done a big chunk of that. You went to the Green Center, you worked on your interviewing skills, somebody helped you with your resume, you're able to quantify your skills. You've developed all of these skills through your coursework, through other jobs, through all of those things, those life experiences that help you to be you. That has helped you to prepare for the journey. Now we have to look at this particular experience and prepare for that. And it really starts with, what is it that we want to get out of this thing? What is it that we want to achieve as part of this thing that we are doing, this internship, this co-op, this student teaching experience? We've got to prepare for that and really begin with the end in mind. At the end of this thing, what is it that you hope to achieve? And then prepare yourself for this journey. The next one is you've got to launch into action. And we're going to talk a lot about this today, because that launching into action is you not being passive, you not sitting there waiting for somebody to ask you to do something. This is your opportunity to be proactive, to be assertive, to really put your best foot forward and say, I want to work on this type of project, and I want, and asking the permission from your supervisor for more work. So when you finish a project, it's not, hey, I'm ready to go home for the day. It's, what more can I do now? Because all of those things are going to help build your reputation as an action-oriented leader. So you've got to launch into action every day. The next one is you've got to adjust as you go, because as you can probably tell, especially over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, life changes pretty quickly, right? And if you just sit there and watch it go by, you're going to miss it. So you do have to adjust as you go and be agile. And I know that you've heard that word before, being agile, being adaptive, being able to basically, I like baseball. So the analogy that I find that works really well is you got to be a shortstop. And if you know anything about baseball, the shortstop has one job, and that is to stop anything that comes to them and throw the batter out at first base, no matter what it is. It could be bouncing to the left, bouncing to the right, it could be a pop fly, whatever. Their job is to catch it. And I think that we have to kind of take on that persona when we make this transition in the world of work, that no matter what gets thrown at us, we are ready to catch it and confidently throw that ball to that first baseman to say, done. Finally, you've got to network with those who know. And believe it or not, you're doing that today. You took the opportunity to network with people and concepts and thoughts that can help you to be successful. Whether it's with the panelist students that we're going to be talking with later, or it's just being here and being present and allowing this information to sink in. So you're already networking, but that networking with information doesn't stop when you get to your internship. And I think it's really important that when you get to your internship, you continue that networking. Now, we think about networking as meeting people, but it's also about information. And are we connecting? We're going out, are we searching for all of the information that we need to hopefully be very successful in this experience that we're having? So, wrapping up the acronym plan, prepare for the journey, launch into action, adjust as you go, and network with those who know. And if you can remember those on a daily basis and just think about, even plan for your day, prepare for the day. When you get to work, launch into action. During the day, adjust as you go, and finally choose someone or things that you want to network with, whether it be information or people. And I think that if you did that on a daily basis, you're really going to have a very, very meaningful experience. So, as I mentioned earlier, the information that we're going to share with you next comes from hundreds of thousands of students from all over the country, big schools, small schools, different majors, all over the country over the last 12 years. And I think that that makes it meaningful because it's rooted in their experiences, not someone else's. And I think that that's good because you get to learn and network with this information from so many other people. And what we were able to do is come up with this top 10 list of things that you can do during your internship to make sure that you are making it count, that you're getting the most out of the experience that you can. So we're going to move pretty fast, but hold on, and please, at any time, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Ask a Question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and then we'll get to that at the end of our presentation. Sound good? All right, let's get going. So the very first thing, and again, this aligns very well with preparing for the journey. You've got to have that plan and set your own personal goals. I challenge you, even if you're a couple weeks into your experience, sit down later today and ask yourself one simple question. What are 3 things that I want to do, achieve, experience, fill in whatever word that you want there, before the end of this internship experience? Write it down. Write it down and maybe set some personal goals. By the end of this internship, I want to be able to fill in the blank. And don't just do 1, do 5, 6, 7. You don't need 100, but I think somewhere between 5 and 7 is really manageable because then at the end of your experience, you get to look back and go, check, 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 check. Yeah, I accomplished all of the goals that I had set forth for myself. And that's really important because the experiences that you have are going to come into play a little bit further down the road. For example, if let's say you're interviewing for a full-time job at graduation, you can bring up those experiences as amazing talking points during your interview. You can talk to them about what you did at your internship and goals that you accomplished. And that's going to send a really clear and confident message to the interviewer that you are results-oriented, goals-oriented, goal-achieving young professional, which is exactly what they're looking for. So having a plan, setting personal goals, absolutely critical. Next, you gotta have regular meetings with your supervisor. And in this new world that we live in, with many of us being remote, that's gonna be a little bit more challenging. But I still think that it's incredibly important because this is your opportunity to really tap into the knowledge that your supervisor has, but also it's a great opportunity to communicate what you're, not only what you're doing, but your ideas and your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences that you're having. And this does a lot of different things. It sends a lot of different messages. Think of it this way. How many of you go to your professor's office hours? That was one of my favorite things. And when you go, do you have specific questions for your professor? Well, yeah, you would think that, I mean, that professor is there working for you. You are paying your tuition to tap into the knowledge of that individual. I think the same can be true for your meetings with your supervisor, so that when you go into that meeting, you've got to have questions ready to go. It could be something as simple as, hey, I was at that meeting yesterday, and so-and-so said this. I didn't quite understand what they said. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means? That's a great question to ask. What does it communicate? It communicates that you were paying attention, that it was important enough for you to write it down, and that your eagerness to learn something new that you didn't know before. Asking questions in this environment is an absolute asset and not a liability, okay? So even when we have these, even if we have a once a week, let's say, meeting with our supervisor in this new digital world, try to increase that a little bit. Try to carve out even 15 or 20 minutes on a day other than when you might meet with them, and ask those questions and look for questions to ask. Don't just sit back and your supervisor engages you and says, hey, do you have any questions? And you're like, nah, I don't have any questions. That's the worst thing that you could say. So think about, as you go through your week, I think one of the things that you can do that I would suggest would be to grab a folder like this and just keep it with you all the time, and almost like a daily diary or a journal, where you can, when something comes up, you can write it down, because it's tough to remember stuff a day or two later with everything that you've got going on. So again, I encourage you to keep that notebook. I think I mean, here I am, just a few years out of school, and I still use one, because that's something that I learned to do during my internship. All right, a third one is you've got to tackle all tasks with a big smile and enthusiasm. One of the things that came out of the focus groups that we did with some students a couple of years ago was, one student said, I really would have given myself the advice to be more enthusiastic about some of the work that they gave me. And I said, well, what does that mean? Tell me a little bit more about that. And he said, well, there was some gruntish work, like really he's like, at the time I thought it was really menial tasks. And I went like entering data into a database and doing some filing and organizing of information and things like that. He's like, I didn't understand at the time that I was doing that to build up a knowledge base and build up some information that I could have for future projects. And he said, I really look back, and he's like, I can remember, my boss asked me to do this, and I just kind of did one of those. And he said, now I get it, and I wish I would have understood that back then, that the enthusiasm that I bring to every task is really a reflection of my ability, and their desire, or influences their desire to possibly want to hire me. Because let's face it, people want to hire enthusiastic people who want to do good work. This is a way that you can showcase that. On the flip side of that, we got to avoid negativity. Now, I think that this is going to be a little bit easier in the virtual internship space, because, well, I'm sure you've all heard the term, water cooler talk or lunchroom talk. That can really be a problem, because many full-time employees may try to drag you in to those types of conversations. Again, from our focus groups, the student said that she felt really awkward because the person that sat next to her was always kind of complaining about the company, the work, the benefit plan. I mean, basically anything. She said that anything that came out of this woman's mouth was a complaint. And she's like, I really felt uncomfortable because she was talking with me, and I felt like it just felt uncomfortable. So how do we avoid that? That's a tough one. Again, when you're in the office, I think it's something that you talk with your supervisor or your mentor about, or even talk with somebody at the Career Center, your internship advisor, and ask them the best way to maybe approach that situation. But in the virtual world, in virtual internships, I think this is going to be a little bit easier to deal with, but still wanted to keep it kind of top of mind, because we just don't want to get drugged into those types of conversations in that type of environment. The next one is we've got to listen and learn. And that is really the main focus of our internship, right? The employer 5-10 years ago hired interns to get work done. That was their main purpose, to get projects done and things like that. When we survey employers today, their number one answer as to why they hire interns: talent acquisition. They're using the internship as a feeder system into their full-time employment portal. Excuse me. So this is really important that we do everything that we can to actively listen, actively learn. And now, again, I also teach classes as an adjunct professor, and the students that sit in the front row that are always taking notes, they're actively listening and learning, whereas we all know those students who sit in the back of the room and are dozing off. That is not active learning and listening. So be that student at your internship that sits in the front row, that brings their notebook every day, always taking notes. Because when we take those notes, that allows us to ask those good questions, going back to number 2, when we talk about meeting with our supervisor. So you see how, well, I hope that you are starting to see that these items that we're talking about, these things in this top 10 list, they're very symbiotic. It's part of an ecosystem that you're creating, and one impacts the other, and they're all kind of interrelated, which I think is really important. We can't just do one of them. We have to do all of them all the time. The next one is we've got to figure out ways to get some exposure. And good question, how do we get exposure? Well, we ask good questions. We volunteer for things. We ask to have different, new experiences as we gain new knowledge. We ask to go to certain meetings, and even if it's just something as simple as, let's say you're working in the marketing department, and the finance department is just down the hall, and they've got their weekly team meeting on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Why not ask your supervisor if you could attend that meeting, just to see how and what they do and have that experience, because that's going to give you some exposure to a different part of the company that you might not have gotten exposure from. You get to meet some new people, and also you're going to be able to learn something else. Try that. Next, and this goes with the listening and learning. Ask questions and keep asking them. Every day you should be asking, 5, 10, 15 questions about things. Don't pretend that you know everything, because there's always things we can learn. I try to ask 5 to 7 really good questions a day of my peers, of my colleagues, of even students that I work with. I ask them questions so I can learn more. That's the only way that we can really learn. And when we ask questions, we are communicating a message of our interest and of our desire to want to know more. And again, that's a great quality that we would want our supervisor to know about us, that we're inquisitive, that we like to ask questions, that we want to learn and continue to grow and develop as an employee. So ask those questions and keep asking them. Number 8 goes with all of these things that we talk about. I think it's one of those underlying kind of things that we need to think about every day. This is the prepare for the journey, right? To be proactive and take that initiative. One of the students that we talked with 2 years ago said, I would go to my boss at like Friday at 2 o'clock, and I said, I would say, oh, well, here I'm done with my work, and my supervisor would just be like, why don't you just take the rest of the day off? And I would say, oh, cool, that's awesome. Start my weekend earlier. He said at the end of his experience, he realized that one of the things that his supervisor was doing was giving him an opportunity to say, well, yeah, I could do that, but is there anything else that I can help you with? And that message that was being communicated or wasn't being communicated, really, it kind of came back to bite him a little bit, because during his evaluation, that's one of the things that his supervisor said was like, hey, you brought me work Friday at 2 o'clock, and I said, hey, why don't you take the rest of the day off? And I was just trying to put out there to see if you would say, well, is there anything else I can help you with? So take that opportunity and take the initiative look for work to do. Next is you got to find a mentor. And in many internship programs, a mentor may be assigned to you. It may be part of the internship experience. Now, wouldn't it be fantastic to have one of these two guys as a mentor, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett? Gosh, just think how much we could learn from either one of them. I mean, just tapping into, I mean, they've forgotten probably more than most of us will ever hope to learn. So we want to find that mentor, find that individual that you can talk with about your experience and ask their opinion and advice about, work that you're doing, but also more about what maybe you can do as a young professional. There's some great opportunities for engagement there. Again, we know that based on the data, students that identified that they had identified a mentor, their overall satisfaction was significantly higher than students that didn't. So we know that this is one of those key pieces to you as a student really having a meaningful experience. Finally, network. Don't ever stop networking. Continue to try to meet people within the organization. Continue to tap into new knowledge. That again, networking is not just meeting people, it's also expanding your knowledge. And my hope would be that after 8, 10, 12 weeks with a company, that you are an absolute expert, not only on that company because of all of the research and good questions that you asked, but also the industry that they operate in, that you took that extra step to learn more about the industry. So continue to network. And as you start to apply these 10 things that we talked about, what you're doing is really setting yourself up for that upward mobility, that you are creating the persona with your supervisor, with your new peers and coworkers, that they want to work with you. This is a great person. We want this person on our team because they ask good questions, because they engage with us, that they're really knowledgeable, that they tackle everything with positive, they avoid the negativity. All of these things that we talked about really do help and can help you make that transition to the world of work. So we covered 10 things there. I got two quick bonus things for you. All right. This goes back to the very first one. Leave with tangible accomplishments, something that you can show, whether it's a report that you worked on, a presentation, a video, a website, something that you can point to that says, I worked on this. This should be one of your goals that you set for yourself, that I want to leave with tangible accomplishments that, if I end up working for this employer, great, but if I end up working for another employer, something that I can take with me and show them this is the quality of work that I'm capable of. And the last one, you gotta have fun. You gotta have fun. One of the feedback pieces that we got from some students over the years was, and it's kind of consistent, was my advice, they said, my advice to myself looking back would be, don't treat your internship like going to an 8 a.m. class. And I kind of chuckled at that. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And one student, she said, well, you got an 8 o'clock class, you roll out of bed at 7:45, you grab your backpack, you walk out the door, you go to class. She's like, going to an internship is not like that. I found myself getting, if I had to be at work at 8, I was getting up at like 6:30. I was getting a good breakfast. I was going over my day. I was, really preparing myself. And she said, the more that I prepared myself, the more I enjoyed myself. I thought that was kind of interesting. The more I prepared myself, the more fun that I had, the more enjoyable the experience was. So there's our top 10. As I mentioned earlier, these are all incredibly symbiotic. They are, I don't think you can do just one and say, yeah, I'm doing a good job. It's really doing all of them all the time. And I don't think it's that difficult. And I think you can do this. Actually, I know you can. And if you do, you're going to be setting yourself up for some amazing success. So as we wrap up kind of this portion and get ready to talk with our panelists, I want you to, if you can, remember this one thing, that at the end of every day, so at the beginning of the day, you're preparing, right? You prepare for your journey for that day. But at the end of the day, if you could take just 5 minutes without the phone on, just maybe it's that 5 minutes that you go sit in the car, or maybe you leave work, you go find a bench to sit on, and just think about these 3 questions. What is one thing that I did really, really well today? And answer it and congratulate yourself for that. Then ask yourself, well, maybe what's one thing that I maybe did not do so well today? And then that 3rd question, if I could do that one thing over, how would I do it differently? I guarantee you that if you can start to do this on a daily basis, your overall performance, not just in the internship, but really in life, will get better, because this is something that most people at the end of the day, they just try to forget about it. Instead of reflecting on it and saying, what did I do well? I'm going to congratulate myself for that. Maybe it's, one thing I didn't do so well. Well, I went to that meeting and I forgot my notebook. I really struggled to take notes because I didn't want to just ask somebody for a piece of paper or something like that. And then the answer to that is, if I could do it again tomorrow, what would I do differently? I would be more prepared. I would make sure that I had my folder, because that reflection on your own actions is really how we grow and develop as professionals in the workplace. Your success depends, and you become what you focus on and like people you spend time with. So if you focus on the things that we talked about today and you spend time with those who are doing the same types of things, your road to success is going to be a whole lot easier than focusing on other things and spending time with people who don't share these same values. Bottom line, I want you to keep calm, enjoy your internship. I believe, and I'll insert my opinion here, having seen, 10,000 or so interns, probably more, that I've advised over the years go through these experiences and apply this type of knowledge. It's the more you apply, the more you're going to enjoy it. So with hopefully the end result is your dream job is at the end of this experience. So we've got to prepare ourselves for that. There's an author, Stephen Covey, and many of you may have heard a book that he wrote called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those habits is beginning with the end in mind. So if we can begin with what we want the end of our internship to look like, and we start there, we're going to be able to prepare for this journey much, much better. So with that, what I'd like to do now is start bringing in some folks to help with this, and I'm going to, we're going to stop, let's see, we're going to stop showing the screen, and I want to bring in, let's see, we bring in everybody? Just our panelists, go ahead and hit your, there we go. There we go. Well, hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Well, hey, welcome to our panelist section. Tyson, I'm gonna turn this over to you. Josh, I don't think Josh is on yet.
No, Josh is not.
Okay.
Brian. Yeah. So we're just yeah. Okay. And Jessica too is about to be on, so they should be on soon.
Fantastic. So with that, Tyson, I wanted to just kind of turn it over to you, and let's have this little panel discussion. And first and foremost, hey, you guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us.
Yes, I agree. And Robert, please jump in if you spot a really fantastic question, because you've been doing this just a couple years, right? It just, yeah, no big deal. Hi, welcome everybody, and everybody who is watching. I'm so excited. Robert has done this in the past, but he was so kind and generous and gracious to allow us to do it with University of Rochester students and recent alumni. So we really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Shindell. So what we're going to do today is I just really want to have a genuine conversation and get your thoughts on the new kind of situation that we're in. I'm not going to say what virtual space or all those touch words right this second, but the new situation that we're in. I know most of you have not had internships that are virtual because this is really recent. But I do want you to kind of think about, as we've talked about before, how everything that you've done now could apply if something is done virtually. So I'm so excited to have you. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I work for the Green Center team. We are the main career center on University of Rochester campus. I am actually on the employer side of things, so I'm the employer program connections program director is my specific title, and I've been with the University of Rochester about a year now, but I have 17 years of business experience. So I myself have hired and done internships and promoted over 3,000 people in my career. I know I look just 21, but I've done just a few. So, and I also have lived all over the country. So I'm really curious. We got a wide range, and I'm curious to see where you've interned and kind of what that's been like. So if we can go around, I'm going to introduce you just by first name. If you could please introduce yourself, tell us whether you're graduated or not, and kind of just briefly what your major is and where you've interned. Okay, let's start with you, Max. Hi, Max.
Sure. Hi, guys. My name is Max. I'm a recent graduate from the U of R, received my BS in chemical engineering and a minor in material science. I'm originally from Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And so I've had a couple different internships and research experiences over the years. Starting after my freshman year, I interned with the Department of Defense in Picatinny, New Jersey. And so that was a lot of just chemistry, kind of wet experiments. Following my sophomore year, I interned with Schott Advanced Optics. That was much more of an industrial type internship, so away from the research, much more, using CAD programs, much more of an industrial type internship. And then junior year, I did research at the U of R, and I worked at the Laboratory for Laser Energetics. So that was full throttle, 100% diving into physics and research. And now that I'm, finished my degree, I'll be working at Javelin Process Systems. That's a company in Rochester. They design and automate processes for the food and beverage industries across the US. So it involves a lot of travel, a lot of classic chemical engineering. And so I would say the experience I've had have kind of been a mix of industry, government, and research. And so I've been able to kind of scout the field a little bit.
Perfect. Wonderful. Anna, you next. Oh, no, we're having trouble hearing you again. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm also a recent graduate with a BS in chemical engineering. My research experiences are more focused on the biological applications of chemical engineering. So I worked at the medical center after my freshman year, basically as a lab tech, just doing basic lab stuff. After my sophomore year, I worked at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals just outside of New York City, and I was doing analytics for their R&D division. And then after my junior year, I did a research experience for undergraduates, the NSF, at Tufts University, where I focused on applying data science to cancer cell biology data. And now that I've graduated, I am going to be doing a Fulbright grant in Denmark and then pursuing my PhD at UC Berkeley in chemical engineering.
Wonderful. Congratulations. That's going to be an exciting semester. I'm so happy for you. Next, Josh, thank you for coming. Hi, how are you? Josh, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah. I'm a second semester senior, I guess. I have a couple more classes, so I'm not coming back to campus. So after my sophomore year, I interned at this company called Henry Schein. They're basically like the Amazon of medical supplies. And I worked at a distribution center in Reno, Nevada, which was a pretty cool place. And I worked at a distribution center, and they just didn't really have an internship plan. They just got an intern, and then I just worked on the floor of the warehouse, and I just learned all of the jobs, and then they just had me solve problems. So I did like an ergonomic study. I did like a training video. I did lots of just random tasks. And it was really cool just to actually be very, very useful. And then I chose, after that experience, I chose to take a year off and actually to create basically create like a makeshift co-op program. Because after that experience, I just realized that getting jobs in different sectors is actually quite hard sometimes, and internships can sometimes limit your opportunities later. So I ended up spending 5 months on I'm working at Naval Sea Systems Command, like in LA. So I worked at a laboratory for like the weapons interface branch, which is just some design gauges for all the sea-based weapon systems. And I got to go on ships. I got to go to San Diego multiple times. I got to go to all kind of like naval facilities in Southern California, and I got to meet lots of people. A VP from Microsoft came. It was great. And then I spent a year at MIT Lincoln Laboratory after that, and I worked in the rapid prototyping group. And I got to work with unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles. I got to 3D print toys of like the different systems, and I got to build a full like system and design it, fabricate. So it was really nice to be able to spend a longer amount of time there. Then I worked at the optics department senior year. I just worked in a laboratory. I got to design a light source and stuff, and talk to a lot of optics people on campus, which on campus has like a lot of opportunities that I think a lot of students at U of R do not actually take advantage of. And I actually learned a lot at that job on campus.
Perfect. Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points, Josh. I have 16 questions just based on what you just said. Perfect. And last but not least, also, Robert, Jessica we started a little bit early. Jessica Silverstein, she might pop in, so you can turn her on. Brian, let's hear about you.
So my name is Brian Flipiak. I'm also a recent graduate of the University of Rochester. I graduated with a degree in environmental science with a focus on climate science. And I've done 2 different internships in 2 very different areas. So after my sophomore year, I studied fish out in Seattle through the Joint Institute for the Study of the Atmosphere and the Ocean at the University of Washington, where I was placed at a NOAA Federal Fish Research Center for the entire Northwest. And so I worked on hands-on with biological samples and fish, and got to go out and collect samples, and something very different than what I wanted to do and what I'm going to currently be doing, which is based on my second internship, where I worked at Texas A&M University through an NSF REU, as Anna mentioned, where I was able to look at hurricanes and tornadoes that are produced in hurricanes and help improve warning statistics for forecasters at national weather centers. And so that has led me to where I'll be attending the University at Albany in the fall for a graduate degree in atmospheric science, and I'm working at the National Weather Service during that time as well.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Tyson, I don't know about you, but all of a sudden I feel like I'm completely unqualified to be on this call.
Well, thank goodness we're not doing a panel about that. So we don't have to. No.
Those are some amazing experiences.
Yeah, U of R students are a wonderful bunch. Yeah,
wow.
Brilliant. And that is a perfect place to jump in. And actually, I want to go off of one of the things that Josh said. So let's start with the intention in mind, like Robert mentioned during the workshop. And one of the intentions is for this to lead to a full-time position. And sometimes internships can be surprising, and we, learn things about ourselves that we didn't expect to. So I have a question for the panel. So when you're thinking about the internships that you've done, what are tips that you would give to students about how you've written that story into your resume, how you've written those skills into your resume, specifically, even if it maybe is an internship that you ended up knowing that you wouldn't want to go into that field? What is your advice on how you frame what you've learned? And anybody just jump in.
I can maybe start with that. I'd say one of the big things that would help, and this I thought was surprising after doing it, is that after you have the internship, it's really surprising how quickly you'll forget some of the key projects you worked on. You'll have an idea of what you did, but while you're at the internship, just along the lines of always working on the next step, make sure to jot down, he's bringing the notebook in, make sure to jot down what you're working on, because in a couple months, you might forget exactly what you were doing. the details might not be there. So have that down, have that recorded, and that way when you go into the fall, you'll have all those things perfectly documented. And then what you can do is if you can decide, because, you know, say for instance, when I worked at the Department of Defense and it was in the explosive development branch, I didn't plan on going into explosives development. That was not my dream job. I love the internship, but it was not what I wanted to do full time. Is you can take the experiences, and now that they're well documented, you can cater them towards the position that you want next. So really make sure that, for instance, if you're doing chemistry experiments, you can write down that you have a lab experience with certain equipment. You've been trained to write long lab reports, and you can read them over. So all of that says to your employer that you're it's not your first rodeo. You know, you've been through an experience. You can look at this stuff and you'll be valuable to them, but make sure to document it, and then make sure that you can look at what you've done and then rewrite it, reframe it towards something that will matter towards your next internship. That'd be my advice.
Leaving with tangible accomplishments.
Yep.
Yeah, like I definitely agree with that. I would also say while at the internship, really like begin to learn more about like to learn more about the general industry that you're in, because there's a lot of different branches to an industry. And that MIT Lincoln Lab was actually really great, because the lab had lots of talks and lots of speakers, and also they had like a lot of lab alumni who actually work at all kind of other national laboratories and technology companies. And I just found it was really useful learning kind of like what people there did before getting there, and what people there who actually left did too, because it's kind of cool to see that people don't necessarily have to necessarily stay like in the same industry, and that it is possible to move to other areas. And in terms of leveraging just like skills, I actually got a job on campus doing that. Like I actually didn't work with any of the optical sensors that MIT Lincoln Lab I worked with, but like all the platforms I worked on had a whole bunch of sensors that like I built mounts for and stuff, and I just talked about those. And I got a job at the optics department. And then I recently applied to a camera R&D internship at this self-driving car startup company called Argo AI. And I got a camera R&D internship interview, and I just had my final interview a couple days ago. We're doing like image, it's doing like image analysis. I hope I get it, but it wouldn't have been possible to get a job like that, like at a leading self-driving car company, to even be interviewed and considered if I hadn't been able to leverage just at first working with sensors, and then working at the optics department, and then actually considering doing a job doing a whole bunch of image analysis, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so I just want to iterate what Josh said, in that when you're, especially if you do like an industry internship, it's a really good opportunity to kind of see what other people in the company who have different roles, what their background is and what they're doing. So while I loved my internship, that department wasn't something that I wanted to be a part of, and I really looked at the different levels of management within the company, and I saw like the big shot scientists making the big decisions and people bringing their problems to them, and I saw that everyone in those roles had a PhD, and that was what I could see myself doing. And so from there, when I was looking for my internship the next summer, I thought about, okay, what can I do to kind of set me up for graduate school applications? So it's also just a good, internships are also a very good opportunity to kind of observe everything else that's outside of your job around you, and just to kind of gauge a better understanding of the industry and the company that you're in.
Network, network, network.
Great point. Yeah, and that is so important when you think about, so I hear sometimes from students and from even employers that I want a student that knows that they want to go into this industry, and I'm a student and it needs to be perfect. But sometimes, as you've all reflected on, it is the experience that can actually reflect back differences that you kind of want to see in your life. So it's not necessarily just you have to have just the perfect thing. So I want to take a quick break and introduce our last panelist, Jessica Silverman. We started early, so Jessica is perfectly on time, actually early, but we got a little head start. So Jessica, if you're here, if you can turn on and click on your camera and unmute yourself, I'd love to say hi to you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Amazing. So it won't let me share my screen because it's saying that there's like too many like webcams up, but that's totally fine. My name is Jess. I along with everyone else, I'm guessing, maybe not, but just graduated from the U of R with a degree in public health and a minor in anthropology. Oh, hello, that's me. And I am currently doing an internship that I have been doing for actually a year and a half on campus with the Mindful University Project, which is a section of part of UHS. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's perfect. Good. Okay, so Jessica, just to get you up to speed, we were talking just last question about how the experiences that the students and graduates have done not necessarily led to what they want to do for their career and upcoming what they're planning to do. It's actually Anna's even, decided to go get a PhD of Fulbright. She just like skipped over. Like, let's do it for her plans for the future. So can you tell us your internships? What have they led you to think about kind of how you plan to do things the same or differently for your career?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable question, and just kind of listening to everyone else's answers. For example, myself, I know that just like in my personal life, I love being with other people and talking with other people. And I was having a really hard time figuring out, like, I mean, I still am, a very hard time figuring out what do I want to do with my life. And like, that's the big question. And just share a little bit, like, for people listening, if you're having anxiety or stress about that, like, you are so normal, even though that probably doesn't help much. But for what it's worth, like, even though I've had a lot of internships and a lot of different experiences and connected with a lot of people, I every time before I got the internship or whatever, like, was like, oh, I don't know what I want, I can't do this and whatnot. So totally normal. I just want to say that first. But going back to what I was saying, I knew I wanted, I like talking to people and whatever. And so I did an internship with a women's day center where it was a lot of focusing on like providing emotional support, really spending a lot of time with people. So I kind of took this idea of like, okay, this is what I like to do in my personal life. How can I do this professionally and just kind of put myself in an experiment? Turns out I really liked it. It's also really difficult and really emotionally taxing. And so there's like things to balance, but everything you do, you'll kind of generate some data about, okay, like part of me liked this, part of me didn't, here were the challenges. Maybe I want to continue exploring this type of thing, working with people in a different way, or no, maybe I wanted to like do something where I work at a desk. And so whatever you do, you're really just collecting data about the next thing that you'll do. And you never really know what that's going to be, and it kind of just happened.
No, thank you for sharing. That is a perfect point and a good transition to kind of where I want to go next. I have a few kind of bigger buckets of just advice that I want to make sure that we give the students today. And the next one is around, many of our students will be doing virtual internships. They are currently doing them over the summer, and I have a feeling that they will likely continue into the fall in some respects in industry. So when we look at what Robert had said during the presentation about when a manager might go, hey, it's Friday, let's take the rest of the day off. And then it's, kind of with an indication of where your work ethic, your plans for the internship are. And then you go, yeah, no, great, the weekend, perfect. So let's talk and shift to how you have learned, how you have experienced keeping yourself on track. So again, leadership, it's sometimes amazing, sometimes it's not. The purpose of this panel is to not always paint just everything is going to be great during an internship. everybody's going to be smart and amazing and supportive. Sometimes that's not the case. So how have you kept yourself on track with your productivity? And when you think about students that are doing virtual internships, there might have been a time that you did remote things that weren't under someone's gaze. What advice could you give them about how they could do that this summer and do that better?
I can start with this one. One of the things that I really learned, and I think it's helpful for a lot of people, is that wherever you think your internship is going or your research position, it could just as easily take a different direction. And so when you get that title and you know for the summer you're going to be a project engineer or whatever internship it is, it may not be as glamorous as it sounds on paper. And so a lot of the times you think when you're going in that your boss is going to have all these really, really cool projects lined up, and each one is going to give you great experience. It'll be perfect for your next internship. And in reality, that's not really the case. You'll get some projects that are related to what you want to do. And then the other work, which was mentioned before, might be more of the grunt work. And I think what's important is to treat that work as if a way of proving yourself, because as an intern, you're going to be at the bottom of the totem pole. And so it's expected that when there's things to file, boxes to move, stuff like that, it comes onto you. And so rather than try and toss that aside and say, hey, I only want the cool projects, only the glamorous things, you kind of have to take both hand in hand. And so when I was at SHOT Advanced Optics, one of the things they had me do was go into all these files that nobody had organized for 10 years. They said, when you don't have work to do, go work on this. And so I would go and I'd organize these files, but I used that so that when I was working on it, I would go back to my boss and say, well, can I work on something on this other project now? I've been filing, can I work on this? And so that kind of gives you the credibility, it earns you the respect to work on the things that you like. And then I would say, going back to the main question, is keep a list of things that you want to do. So, filing, nobody's going to have filing papers, moving boxes. That won't be on anybody's list of things they want to do. But keep a list of the things that you want to do that will help you towards your next internship. Maybe it's doing a statistical analysis of something where you can, write that skill on your resume, which will look awesome. So keep a list of the things you want to do. Don't be afraid to do the grunt work, to prove yourself, to give you that opening into more of the glamorous type stuff.
Yeah, like I actually had a very interesting time at so at first at MIT Lincoln Lab I was working in building automation systems, which is kind of random, but I got an internship in it and I didn't know what it was. And at the Navy I was doing a lot more mechanical design kind of work, and I really didn't like building automation. And I just went to conferences, which I guess virtual, which would be just lots of webinars. And at the conference, I ended up going to a network event where I was at a table with three head NASA engineers, and then I was with I was with the group leader at MIT Lincoln Lab, and I was talking to the group leader, and he said that it sounded like I was in the wrong group, and I was like, yeah, I think I am. And then he introduced me. I interviewed with him, but I didn't have the skill set for the team that he was in. But he introduced me to his friend at Rapid Prototyping, which was the group leader. So I talked to the group leader, and it was actually a job interview for a co-op position, which I didn't know it was a job interview. He just offered me a job at the end and asked and basically asked when could I start. So in January, after starting in October, I actually changed teams. I went to Rapid Prototyping, and they weren't expecting me. And at first, I was doing kind of grunt work, I designed some of my motor covers, 3D printed, and then I got to design a toy of the full next generation system that they're making. But then about 6 months into that internship, he had me design a full system. And I got to design it over the course of 4 months I was on a team with one other intern. So it was crazy that just 2 interns designed a project that a full-time graduate 2 or 3 years out of school would do. And it was really crazy that it went from working in the basement on the building to then building technology systems at the same internship. Also, I'd really be open to co-ops, because a lot of students are not, And I think sometimes, like, I've had multiple friends who are at great institutions and they were not in the right team and they didn't consider doing a co-op, and they could have got into the right team if they would have just asked if they could stay for longer or like talk to people. And I think that's a really big thing to do, because co-ops are really useful to have a longer time somewhere.
Perfect. What are some other thoughts? Brian from Seattle, like in Seattle, right? You were in Seattle. Other than the weather, fantastic there. So
in Seattle, I kind of got the definition of grunt work. We were going out to do a fishing trip, and for whatever reason, they couldn't afford to buy the crab pots or the fish pots. So they bought crab pots and made us line them with like zip ties and some like webbing. So that was we did that for like every day for a couple weeks. That's me and one of the other interns that I was working with. And we just sat there and we did it, but we both got to go out into, they took us on their NOAA fishing boats out to San Juan Islands, which is usually a whale watching site as well. And so we got our own personal whale watching tour while collecting all these pots and stuff during the day. But then we also get to come back and we get to use all the instruments that we want to. And, yes, we dissected 500 plus samples of fish that were under an inch long, but we wanted to do it and we got it done. And then we were able to go on and use the mass spectrometers and the other machines that they wanted us to use, but we had to do all the work for first. And even sitting at a computer, I had a very different experience in Texas where all I did was sit in front of a computer and I just had to code and I had to read and I had to do things like that, where I was using the ability of the computer to do all this grunt work, but I still had to manually do it. And so by showing and getting it done every day of, oh, okay, I finished, all of, the storms I'm looking at for 2018 in 3 days when somebody else might have taken 2 weeks to do it, I was able to just go back and say, okay, what do I need to do now? And by the end, my advisor was just like, what do you want to do for your project? Because he wanted me to get stuff done, and then just let me pick my project. And that's what I was able to do and then present at a professional conference in January. So doing the heavy lifting in the beginning and some of that grunt work is very helpful, as we've all kind of indicated, towards getting to bigger projects.
Okay. And also the communication piece. I think, one of the things that are so important is that when you think about managing up and networking while you're there and really communicating what you are doing, what you're producing, but in a way that really helps and supports the team. What are some strategies that you've used to communicate your work? Maybe even sometimes to people that weren't necessarily open to it, or let's talk about how you have communicated within your internships.
Going off of that kind of, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Cool. Okay. Kind of bridging together this question and the last question. So I wanted to kind of first say that the first thing, at least with the virtual internships, and if this is not, most likely this is not the typical way that this internship is happening. And so I think that something really important for me, I feel uncomfortable sometimes reaching out to a supervisor or someone above me, even if it's just like a question, okay, but if it's something like, I think this would be really beneficial so the team could, communicate more or whatever. And I had a conversation recently with someone, and she was like, yeah, I mean, they've never done this before, and I imagine that they would love to hear your feedback. Like, everyone is just kind of swimming in this unknown of how to do things. And so if that helps anybody in any way, kind of communicating and going off of that, I wanted to say that within the current internship I have, I did it for one semester a previous year, and kind of just I every day sat down and just did whatever I felt like and kind of got nowhere. And this time around, I actually sat down in the beginning of the beginning of the internship and wrote down what are the goals of my position, what is my role. So for me, it was okay, so I want to increase people's awareness of mindfulness. I want to maybe you write down a specific number of I don't know, participants, or whatever the thing is, maybe having some concrete things. And then it's okay, what are my ideas? What am I gonna do to get to these goals? And then after you kind of thought about it, setting up in a meeting with your supervisor, sitting down and be like, okay, so I'm really excited about this position. I have these ideas. What are the ideas that you have that I should be working on? And what do you want me to focus on? What do you want me to prioritize? And from there, I also found it really helpful. Like my supervisor had a lot of different interns. And so we would kind of just like meet all together. And so I was like, can we set up a weekly individual meeting? Because like I need to hold myself accountable, because like last time I did this, I really like didn't do anything, and I want to do stuff. I care about this, and I want to, yeah. So I hope that those are some helpful tips. So I think just taking a moment to step back and being like, all right, what is the purpose of me being here, and what do I want to do about it? Going from there.
Yeah. Anna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so kind of similarly to Jessica, I'm like a huge to-do list fan. But in contrast to her, I was kind of given like this very big overarching goal when I was working at Regeneron to basically create an automated system for analyzing bioreactor samples. And so, but in order to achieve that, there were a ton of like different little things I had to do. So for me, it was all about setting like small goals for each week and then breaking that down to like each day, what do I hope to get done? And then if I don't get it done, how does it roll over? And so that way, like, even if I finished my to-do list, like for that day, I could kind of look ahead and be like, okay, like what's my next step? So there was kind of always something to do. But I find that really helpful, especially because in my position, I was not only working on this project, but I was also supporting, like doing lab work for other people as well. So I had to meet the timelines of other people, and that can definitely place pressure on you because you are responsible for data that other people need to make important decisions. So I think making a to-do list, and even like, because I was running experiments, even planning out like, okay, I need to do this part of the experiment and then I have an hour to do this thing. You don't have to do that every day. Like, I'm not saying you have to plan out every second of your day, but in certain situations, it can help you to like maximize your time and to meet like multiple competing deadlines.
I love that part. And I just want to take a quick side note, and if anybody else wants to jump in on that last question, but Anna brings up a great point, is that all of us are facing that. And, myself as a professional in a career, as far as information coming at you, project management, kind of timelines. So what are any suggestions for applications, software, systems, books that you've read that have helped you manage that? So for our office, we use Monday.com. It's a project management software system, very visual, very helpful, kind of in the timelines, and then also collaborating with people in our office, with colleagues. So kind of let's go around, maybe Max, start with you. What are some books that have really been impressed you, software that you've used that have helped you with this? I think students would love to hear.
Yeah, I'd say I really haven't read too many books. For me, I think the most helpful thing has been Google Calendar. And you have people on all ends of the spectrum who use Google Calendar. Some people like to have every minute filled. And if that works for you, that works great. For myself, I think I like to keep the key things in Google Calendar and then leave some room for flexibility. And then I also use, it's an app on my phone, because sometimes I don't want to always log in and look at my Google account. It's Microsoft To Do. And I just use it on my phone. It's just an app. And that's really easy because you don't have to assign a time to complete something. So, maybe you just have, you have a project due, but you don't quite know if it's going to be a Friday or the following week. You can just write it in, and it kind of gives you that mental freedom to know that you have all of your projects written down somewhere. You're not going to forget anything. So really Google Calendar for scheduling and Microsoft To Do for just keeping track of everything you have to do. So if it's little things that you don't want to throw in your calendar, but you want to remember, put it into Microsoft To Do. So those have kind of been the two software, so to speak.
Yeah, I'll add just, oh, sorry. I was just gonna add briefly. So my big one is Google Calendar. I'm the complete opposite of Max. If I don't like schedule in time to go to the gym, like on my calendar, I'll just like fill it up with meetings. So like I have to like have everything planned out on there. But I think Google Calendar is great. I also think like just having like a physical planner for your like daily to-dos is also very helpful. And you can kind of see visually where you're going to do it in the day in your calendar, and then also have it to check off. It might be overkill for some people. For me, that's kind of what works, because I feel very satisfied checking things off. I think it's kind of more of a mental thing, but if it works, it works.
Right. This is about, yeah, it's customizing. We have the option to do so, which is amazing now. So yeah, Josh, what about you? What do you use for productivity, project management? Any books that you've read?
I'm actually like kind of terrible with this. So like that's why like working at Lincoln Lab was great, because I just had all these random things, and it was like being there was funny because it was like being a scatterbrain there was actually quite useful, because like a lot of the engineers I worked with actually weren't very organized. Like they were, but like all of them were functional, but like a lot of them were just more like, I have these big tasks, I'll work on this sometimes, work on that sometimes. It was more like every like couple days or whatever, just to like check in and make sure that you're like on track. But also like the timelines for things were also really blurred. So I guess like my point here is I think the bureaucratic structure of a place matters a ton. Like also working harder, I found that when like the summer interns came, I actually really struggled with this, because at a place like MIT Lincoln Lab, it's very like it's a national lab, so like it was like a very like elitist place, at least among like the interns. Like it was like people from a very specific background, and it was almost like a work competition among the interns to show who was smarter. And that sometimes caused the interns to work in a way that was just like everyone's trying to do basically a school project. But it turned out that like a lot of things that we worked on, like it was easier just to ask the guy upstairs, like, hey, how do I make this electronics packaging? What are standard practices? Versus competing against each other to figure out who can have the best idea.
Right.
So like not being afraid to ask people is like a huge thing. And I do think at a school like U of R, sometimes that is lost in classes, and sometimes it kind of can be very competitive. And I think that like, at least like in a work environment, I found that like always trying to be the smartest person who works the hardest in some industries actually does matter. But in other areas, sometimes it's just nice to just ask people to get you on like the right track. And
Right.
then like go about solving your problems versus trying to innovate and do something kind every time.
Right. Finding those guides that are genuinely able to help you in the company and kind of guide you through the culture and through pitfalls like that is for a forever lesson, no matter the industry. That is always going to be a wonderful point. I want to circle back to something about the culture and about how you can kind of navigate that as an intern. Brian, what are your thoughts on project management tips and advice that you use?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of pen and paper. So a lot of our stuff, yes, was on the computer, but I had a lab book and I had a notebook and I have my phone. And so a lot of every day I would just kind of keep track of not only what I was doing, but what I got new, what that I completed. And I also am a big fan of keeping the notes app on my iPhone, just like keeping a list of just stuff that, okay, I know that I have to get this form and this, data set in by Friday. And so I also write that, that in by Friday. But I also am writing that in my book. I'm writing what I'm doing on each set in the book, so that if I get bored or I get stuck and it's 2:30, I come back at 9 a.m. the next morning, I know where I left off, and I'm not trying to search and figure out, okay, where did I leave off in the data set? What was I doing yesterday? And so I think that's really the big thing, is making sure you keep track of what you're doing and keeping track of what's coming in and coming out. And so however that works, if that's online or through an app, or just having a list next to your desk of, okay, I know that on Tuesday I have to have this done every week, so I'm going to start it on Thursday because it takes a while. That helps you just kind of get settled and get going. So that's one of the big things that I've learned, is just trying to make lists, kind of figure out what works best for you. And for me, it's just writing it down and making sure I keep seeing it every day and keep up with where I left off, and make sure if I stopped on Thursday and didn't pick it up till Monday, I knew where I was still.
Right. Yeah, one of my favorite books is called Atomic Habits, and they talk about just the difficulty of getting started. And sometimes the scariest part is just how to really think about just how to start it. So all that we're mentioning, and I want to give you a chance, Jessica, to end with your tag. It's all customizable. It's all about what's important for you, and really it's just sometimes just starting, and then that can lead to other systems. So what do you use, Jessica, or books that you recommend that you love?
I have a lot of books I could recommend, but I don't think they're related to, like, I haven't read anything specific about careers or anything, but if anyone has, wants book suggestions, let me know. But I also am a really big fan of using the Notes app. I think that something that I think is particularly difficult with, either doing like schoolwork from home or like, job work or internship work or whatever. It's like we're doing everything in the same place. Like we're eating, we're sleeping, we're working out, we're trying to FaceTime friends, and like, oh yeah, we have work to do. And so I find it personally really difficult, especially with like, okay, like I could wake up anytime, I could go to, it's just like so malleable, and like maybe someone's internship is not as flexible, but for me, it's just like do this amount of hours in this day. And so I personally find that one, making a schedule of my day, kind of like what Anna was saying, like, of course, this is like by person, but like fitting in, yes, like when am I going to like eat my breakfast and when am I going to take a break for lunch? Because I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in like working. And on that note, like for me, like I like to do yoga a lot. So like I'll be doing yoga or I'll be in the shower and I'll think of like an email I have to send. And I'll be like, okay, like I have to go send that email, but like it's already past the time of day that I've allotted for me to do work. And so what I do is I just like jump out my notes. I like write down the person's name. I write like 2 words of like what I'm like the thought that I'm trying to send, because like it makes me nervous and I'm gonna forget it. So I just write it down, and then I'm like, okay, I don't have to think about it until tomorrow when I work again, because you need to separate. Like we're people, there's a lot going on in the world, especially now. Like we all need time for ourselves. So any tips or like mechanisms that work for you to be able to separate, like this is when I work, this is when I don't work, I think are really important during this time.
Right. You bring up a fantastic point. Self-care, putting on the oxygen mask on yourself first and blocking off that time. I know my colleagues, as a center, we value the entire student and our culture wall. Well, so I hear, I haven't seen it since like 1987, but I bet it's still there. We really value just the entire personality of what you need as a person. And I know that when you block off time for exercise, like Anna said, and Jessica, and just block off time for yourself, that's going to make you more productive. So I suggest that for students as well. So I want to dive in real quick. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to really focus on 2 last questions. So one is about culture. So I want to be within the time allowed. I want you to just kind of give your advice. Sometimes internships and sometimes people that you work with and the culture of the environment can be a little jarring. It can be very different. It can be sometimes just not very supportive. And I know that interns sometimes are not valued maybe as much as they should be. It all depends. Sometimes they're very well respected. I just want you to kind of briefly reflect and just give advice for how you would suggest that a student navigates that and takes action to still be successful, even if things are not what you had hoped and people aren't.
I would think a lot about the culture, just in terms of just like not just like day to day, but like what kind of places you want to work, and also how to get hired. Because like I hate to say this, some areas are super elitist. Like if you're trying to get a job at a national lab, you better have had like great internships or like certain backgrounds, and you should like understand that, because that's important to tailoring how you approach finding a job in that area. And some areas are very like connected to each other, and knowing those connections is super useful. Like I found that like working at national labs and research is actually super connected to tech. Like the tech industry and national labs are actually like super tied together in a way that I didn't know before. And they're actually culturally very similar as well. And a lot of people actually bounce back and forth. And I found it out through talking to some of my coworkers who actually used to work at Google, used to work at Amazon, and they were at Lincoln Lab. And it's just like really interesting just saying about like that back and forth. So like the work culture, so like understanding how that company's work culture connects to other places, and also just knowing how your actual coworkers work and like the style that they work in is like really important, because like I like working in smaller teams. And like in a Lincoln Lab is great because the lab was a very flat structure. So like working in a flat bureaucratic structure is completely different from working in like a normal Fortune 500 company. And like knowing that, actually all the jobs that I've followed afterwards have all been in flat bureaucratic structures. So just like knowing those sorts of things is very useful, even if you don't end up taking taking a full-time job. And also like the culture like of a city matters too. So like if someone's considering a job, if it's in a place that you hate, so like if you're doing a virtual internship in, I don't know, like middle of nowhere city that you don't have any connections and you don't want to live,
Right.
you may make a conscious choice not to take that job because it's in that place, because it's virtual, so it's easy to kind of ignore that. And I would really consider thinking about that if you're considering taking a full-time offer somewhere.
That's a wonderful point, or at least making it really purposeful, right? That you might not be there forever. Maybe it's a stepping stone to other things, and that you're probably guaranteed to meet a partner there, just so you know. So that's always the way. So if you move there, you're probably going to get stuck there. But to make it purposefully so you can just make a step somewhere else. Max,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, so as an intern, when you come into your internship, you're not going to be able to change the culture. Likely it's been existing for a while, and so you're not going to be able to single-handedly change it. And I've had two different experiences which were completely different. When I was working for Shot Advanced Optics, and I mentioned before, that was much more industrial-based. And so I was working with engineers, but also a lot of the operators. And these are guys who are probably in their 60s. They've been working their whole life right out of high school only, and it's all with their hands. It's a lot of physical labor. And so when you come in as an intern and they're wearing their blue collar, gown, so to speak, and you have a tie on, it has this, you kind of dive right into the bad side of the culture that already exists. And so I had a lot of, it took a while before I could actually be on good terms with the operators. They didn't like the fact that I looked like the white collar workers, and that was part of the company and been existing for a long time. And as an intern, that can kind of get pushed onto you. But I use that experience to see what I didn't like. And so I knew that I did not want to work for a company where there was this divide, this partition between the engineers and the operators on the floor. And so you kind of have to deal with it. I don't think there's an easy solution, but it gives you a taste so that when you go to look for a job, or maybe it's going into a grad school, you can see, do I like this environment? Could I see myself lasting here for a long time? Is it like the other internship I had where it was horrible? When I was working at the laboratory for laser energetics, it was the classic ivory tower situation. So you had a lot of scientists with PhDs who were doing really awesome work, but they weren't really good at working with other people. And so they would kind of put anybody down who didn't have a PhD. And so I used that when I was looking between jobs and grad school. I saw there was a company that was great. It was really high paying, but I could tell right away that the culture mimicked the internship I had at the laser lab. And I used that to decide between the jobs I wanted. So you're not going to be able to fix it, but definitely take that into consideration and look for the warning signs when you're actually applying for jobs. You're interviewing people to see if that culture matches your expectations.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful point. Anybody have any last thoughts on that question? I have one more question.
I can add just really briefly. So I was very fortunate to not have that situation, but I would say just in terms of advice, if you are someone who, you're in a company, you're as an intern and you have a really toxic culture situation, I mean, ultimately, I would view it as a way to learn how to deal with different people. Even if you go to an amazing company, there's going to be like that one person who's difficult or who is just a pessimist. And so those are also skills you can take away from it. Obviously, it's not ideal. You can also, see if there's anybody else in the company who, maybe someone who has a desk near you, who you can also kind of get mentorship from if your boss isn't necessarily, providing that for you. Obviously within limits, you don't want to disrespect your boss either, so that's kind of a tricky situation. But I would just view it as a way to figure out how to deal with different people who have different personalities than maybe you want to work with, because that'll help you regardless of where you end up in life.
It will always actually be that way. And Anna brings up an amazing point, is that you are always in control of your response to a situation. And again, the intentionality of what this internship is going to lead to. Many positions that I've had have sometimes just showed me what I didn't want to be like, showed me where I didn't want to work. And if that is what you gain out of an internship, if you are proud of your work ethic and your attitude and your effort, then it has been a success, you know, and it is a struggle. And we empathize with interns that are feeling like that, but it's an important lesson. So one last question. So I want first to thank you all so much. You have been amazing panelists. I know the students that are going to see this recording and live this event are really appreciating your genuine advice, and you might get reached out to on LinkedIn if they're smart with their networking to find mentors like you. So one last question. So I'm, let's say I'm a rising junior and it's my summer and I'm just really kind of feeling conflicted about the entire year and where I'm going and what I need to do. What is your last kind of thoughts and advice on what you would give a fellow former college student or a UR student? What's your advice on what you would have done differently and what they can do to make their time a success as an intern? Jessica, you want to start? Oh, no pressure. Oh, I'm just going to call it out.
I just had to unmute myself. I feel like that's exactly where I was. So I would say first, like, I would say having an internship is definitely a privileged situation. Like, you're not getting paid. So if that's not a thing that you're able to do, the Green Center has an internship, a summer internship fund that you can apply for, which I applied for and I got, and you can get up to $2,500. So totally recommend doing that. The advisors even work with you to help you make the best application that you can. But if for some reason financially you're not able to do that, like, it's not the end of the world. Like, get it, you know, it's just another way to learn another experience. Having, you know, a job at maybe like your local convenience store or whatever is another type of experience. Maybe you'll learn you do like to talk to people or not, or like whatever it is. So first of all, and second of all, I would say talk to people that you trust that are like older than you, who have kind of been through this before, whether it be like one of us, a senior friend, or like a sibling or someone you know. I don't know who that would be for you, but I have found that to be personally very helpful.
Perfect. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important no matter what, if you had an internship, it got canceled, if you have a virtual one, whatever it is, I think it's important to think about what can you do to gain something out of whatever the experience is. So even if you got, I know because my brother's internship got canceled, and for him it's trying to figure out what can I do this summer to help make myself, you know, more appealing as I go forward. And for him, it's just coding and learning how to do different data techniques. And I feel like that can be applied across everything for people. So if you can, you know, if your internship isn't going the way it wants, or it's virtual but it's not the same, try to think about what else you can do or what other resources you can reach out to and try to figure out a way to like gain something else along with what you're doing and kind of exemplify, okay, I'm willing to do what I want to do right now, but I also need to look for what else can help me and kind of realize that. And so I think that's something really important to think about, is only what you're getting out of it, but also what else can you do to help get more out of what you're doing.
All right. Well, it is 3:30 on the dot, and I want to thank you again for such a wonderful, amazing conversation. I want to thank Robert Shindell for hosting us and for providing an amazing workshop. I thank you all for being here. Please, if anybody's watching, find them on LinkedIn, find our panelists. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I will definitely be emailing you again for other events. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your summer, a trip to Denmark, whatever may be in your future. So happy for all of you. It's been really a pleasure. So thank you very much.